I've managed to fall behind on my movie watching for the year.
No way!
I didn't intend for it to happen, I just kinda let it slip away from me. Time sure has flown by. But you know what? No more excuses. I've decided to devote the next several weeks into working to getting caught up in this new segment that I'm calling Ketchup Korner. This is where I'm going to be taking a look at movies that have already come out this year and just let you know what my thoughts on them are. We're going to start with 5 a video. Yeah, we're going old school this time. The reviews aren't going to be super long and the editing is going to be very simplistic.
So what else is new?
The goal is to just review the films, give them their due diligence. The films selected will be relatively at random, although I will try to mix it up so that you're always getting at least one solid recommendation and at least one film that I rip to shreds for your entertainment. But anyway, these reviews are long overdue.
Okay, let's get this show on the road.
But before we get started, as always, a quick thank you to my patrons over on Patreon. And if you enjoy the content I make and would like to offer your support, then for as little as $1 a month, you can get your name listed right here at the start of every video. Link to that is in the description below. And now, on to the first film.
Now that you're back, it's going to be hard for you to leave again.
Clearly.
The Bricklayer, based on the novel written by Paul Lindsay, tells the story of a former CIA agent, played by Aaron Eckhart, who has become a, bricklayer. But after 3 journalists have been murdered, the CIA tries to recruit him to find out who's responsible, and it turns out that someone from his past, someone he thought was dead, may be the person behind it all. Does that premise sound at all familiar? Well, it should, because this has the premise of what sounds like a parody of a stereotypical action film. The rancorous, retired agent who doesn't work for the CIA anymore and just wants to live a normal life, but they tell him that he's the only man for the job because he's the very best, like no one ever was, and that his country needs him, and yeah, you've seen this before. Which would be more excusable if the film had a sly sense of self-awareness like The Beekeeper, but this film is so dry and witless and takes itself so seriously. This is just so standard and derivative, and there's nothing about it that's in any way noteworthy. The movie tries to keep things fresh with all these twists and turns that they throw at you a mile a minute, but it honestly suffers from the exact same issue that I have with other espionage films, in that it gets so twisty that it becomes confusing trying to keep track of what exactly the characters are doing, or who knows what information at any given time. Even the action scenes aren't anything to write home about. Director Renny Harlin used to be one of the freshest action directors out there with films like Die Hard 2, Cliffhanger, and The Long Kiss Goodnight under his belt. But it's clear that his best directing days are long behind him. He shoots all the action with a robotic feel to it, like the characters are waiting for their cues and the action scenes don't have any sense of scale to it. This is straight to VOD junk. A film that you put on if you are desperate for an action film, any action film, and you stumble across it on Netflix streaming and literally nothing else sounds even remotely appealing to you. It's not even so terrible it's fun to pick apart and analyze, it's just dull and boring. Watch The Beekeeper instead, you'll get way more out of the experience. The Bricklayer gets an empty shot.
Open your eyes!
No way!
Come on! See how much better that is, kid? Gotcha!
Orion the Dark is the new DreamWorks animated film and tells the story of a young boy named Orion, voiced by Jacob Tremblay, who is scared of absolutely everything, especially the dark. But after getting tired of his constant complaints, Dark, played by Paul Walter Hauser, decides to reveal himself to Orion and takes him on a journey to prove that he's not as scary as Orion thinks. So yeah, the plot itself is pretty basic. The idea of darkness not being as scary as the main character thinks has been done as far back as Pajama Sam. But the film makes up for the banal setup with some pretty clever writing, and even having a little bit of an edge to it. Not surprising considering that the film was written by Charlie Kaufman of all people. There's actually a lot of really twisted pieces of humor, like the gags that involve Sleep knocking people out, including one image where she's literally smothering somebody with a pillow. There's even jokes in here for adults that kids would absolutely not get, and I don't mean that in an innuendo kind of way. There's a Saul Bass reference in a kid's film. There's also a scene where Werner Herzog narrates a documentary about the dark. That's really clever, and it shows the filmmakers weren't just trying to throw together some pig slot for kids. They were actually trying to put something of substance together. It touches on some themes of existentialism, or at least as far as you can explore it in a film aimed at kids. I could see this really working as a transition film for kids. One that you show them when they feel that they're ready for a little bit more edgier or darker material. And the relationship and bond that forms between Orion and the Dark, while nothing earth-shattering or groundbreaking, is handled appropriately, and said bond feels believable, like a real connection has been made between them. The big issue here is that the story composition is pretty messy, and the longer the film progresses, it starts to get a little bit too clever for its own good. Conflicts get resolved by conjuring things up out of nowhere, which you could probably defend because, well, it is supposed to be a bedtime story within this story, but that doesn't change the fact that some of the developments feel really cheap, which lessens the tension that it's trying to build up. I feel like Charlie Kaufman is trying to do the same thing here that he did with Adaptation, where once the story has nowhere else to go, it takes a sudden shift where the film that we're watching morphs into something completely different. And while that worked in Adaptation as a meta-commentary, I don't think it's as successful here. So it may be a little bit too ambitious, but honestly, I'd rather a film have that problem rather than it being not ambitious at all. It's got its charm and likability and some funny moments, and it has a good, if obvious, moral. Orion the Dark gets a solid half-full shot.
Wow, you've had a full day.
Drive Away Dolls is the very first film directed by Ethan Coen without the help of his brother Joel, and tells the story of two lesbians, played by Margaret Qualley and Geraldine Viswanathan, who head on down to Florida for a road trip but wind up crossing paths with a group of criminals who are after a briefcase and the trunk of their rental car. I'm not going to mince words here. This is an awful film. This is some of the worst filmmaking and writing I've ever seen come out of a single Coen brother. It has a lot of their signature style of it, like an oddball cast of characters, plot tangents, and bizarre moments, but with absolutely none of the charm or wit or intelligent writing to make it work. The plot of this film is inherently paper thin, with maybe about 30 minutes of actual story. The rest of the film is occupied by scenes of lesbians making out or having sex, which kind of makes you wonder if the film was made at all just so Ethan Coen could have an excuse to film them. If this film wanted to be an examination of lesbian hookup culture, fine, but good luck learning anything about it in this film other than lesbians like to have sex with women. Wow. No kidding. Next you're going to tell me that the sky is blue. The crime element genuinely feels like it was thrown in at the last second in order to try to give this film some kind of plot or structure, and the payoff to it is just so cheap, lazy, and uninspired. The gags in this are puerile, like something out of a bad Hangover sequel, like a tiny dog humping a man's rectum or a dildo doubling as a doorknob. I do not understand what Ethan Coen was trying to do here, or what he's trying to say with this material. The only positives I can really say is that Geraldine Viswanathan is trying. I mean, she is really trying. She's likable, and I actually would like to see her in something that's much better written. And there's a character called Curly, played by Bill Camp, who is pretty much the only character in this I actually thought worked, but unfortunately he's only in like 4 minutes of the movie. I don't know what would possess Ethan Coen to make something this pointless and stupid. Maybe he was frustrated over Joel shooting down some of his ideas and wanted to prove to him that these ideas would work. Well, if that was the case, then this was a total failure, and he probably needs to seriously consider working on his next one with his brother instead of flying solo. Even at a short 84 minutes, this thing felt like it was padded, and I was ecstatic when this was over. Drive Away Dolls gets an empty shot.
The question is, do you have it in you to make it epic?
Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga, is the 5th film in the Mad Max franchise, and really more than anything a prequel to Fury Road, that tells the story of how Furiosa, this time played by Anya Taylor-Joy, ended up from a place of great abundance to working for the infamous warlord, Immortan Joe. This is a terrific motion picture from filmmaker George Miller, and is all but guaranteed to make it onto my top 10 best films of the year. At its core, this is an operatic story about hopelessness, as we slowly watch every single good thing in Furiosa's life get stripped away from her until all she has left is her anger. The anger that we see come to full fruition in Fury Road, with her own story acting as a microcosm for the rest of the citizens also stuck in this hellscape. This film reminded me of a Shakespearean tragedy, as Miller makes the controversial and bold decision to not have the adult Furiosa appear until nearly an hour into the film, but doing so helps give this story and the world the scope that it truly deserves. And speaking of which, Anya Taylor-Joy is brilliant as Furiosa, being able to convey so much passion and explosive anger even when she's taciturn. She's one of the finest actors currently working in Hollywood. The amount of emotion she's able to convey with merely her eyes is the stuff of cinema legend, and I'm constantly impressed by the passion that she brings to every single performance she gives. And I really hope she's able to get herself an Academy Award sooner rather than later. The action scenes are nothing short of exhilarating, which not only provides some dazzling high-octane eye candy, but actually serves the narrative and thematic needs of the film. You can practically feel Furiosa's soul splinter the more men that she's forced to kill just to survive, and you really do get the sense of just how wicked this apocalyptic wasteland is, wherein Furiosa has no choice but to make a deal with the devil in order to get revenge on an even worse devil. It is brutal, harsh, and unforgiving, but it is also exuberant and filled with filmmaking craft. And in my personal opinion, I actually think this is an improvement over Fury Road, although admittedly not many people agree with me. I was very disappointed that this film didn't do as well at the box office as it deserved. I wish more people had given it a fair shake and been able to see this epic on the biggest screen imaginable like I did. But it is currently available on home video and on streaming, and as of the recording, it is available on Max. So if you missed this on the big screen, now's your chance to rectify that. Furiosa, a Mad Max Saga gets an easy, full shot.
It's all right to be afraid. Have faith. He will protect his children.
The Exorcism tells the story of an actor, played by Russell Crowe, who is looking for his first big comeback role following issues with alcoholism, and lands the part of playing a priest in a demonic possession film. But as his behavior starts getting erratic, people start wondering if maybe he's fallen back off the wagon, or maybe he's actually demon-possessed himself. The Exorcism was mostly finished filming in 2019, but then production halted after the pandemic, and then the remnants sat on a shelf for 4 years. But then, presumably based on the modest success of The Pope's Exorcist, which also starred Russell Crowe in a film about demonic possession, and also potentially to fill a release slot because of the writer's strike last year, this was subsequently finished and then dumped into theaters to try to make some quick cash. This is more or less the same tired old demonic possession shtick that Hollywood's been running dry for 50 years since the original Exorcist. This is actually one of the most inventive ideas they've had for one in a while. I mean, the Exorcist film became infamous for being so trouble-ridden that many on set legitimately believed that the film was cursed, or that a real demon was running havoc on set, so much so that a real priest was brought in on set to cleanse it. Making a film about a real demonic possession happening while making a film about one could lead to all kinds of possibilities. You could play around with whether or not it's real, or simply method acting gone too far, or people being overly paranoid, or maybe you could even do what Shadow of a Vampire did, and have a cast member literally sell his soul to Satan to get the most authentic performance possible. There are literally so many story possibilities here. But nope, instead of doing any of that, it's just comfortable doing the basic, generic route. The same tired old story we've seen a million times. And the longer the film goes on, the dopier and sillier this film gets, and not in a way that feels intentional like with Pope's Exorcist. Character decisions in this are baffling. Like, for some reason, people witness something that is undeniably supernatural, but they don't even really seem to care, or they leave Russell Crowe's character alone with someone else, even when by that point he's clearly mentally unstable. Or it feels like there's just scenes that are just straight up missing. And the climax seems like it's going through the motions of exorcism cliches without even a hint of passion behind them. The saving grace in this is Russell Crowe, who is perfectly content just mumbling and snarling his way through this film, resulting in an entertaining performance. And if you choose to view this as an unintentional parody of exorcism films, you might actually be able to get something out of it. This definitely is not a good movie, but I admit I did get some level of ironic enjoyment out of it. As such, The Exorcism barely clings onto a half-empty shot. And I guess that's it for now. Thank you so much for watching. I'll try to get more reviews just like this out in the coming weeks, as well as reviews for big current releases. My goal is to get to at least 100 reviews before the end of the year. So if there are any 2024 films that you wanted me to take a stab at, or you're just curious about what I thought of it, then feel free to let me know in ye old comment section down below. And as always, you can catch more of my reviews over on my Letterboxd page. The link to that is in the description below. And as always, a thank you once again to my beautiful patrons over on Patreon. Your support really does mean the world to me. And make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss any future reviews. Have a good day, and I'll see you next time.